There are moments in sports where the numbers stop making sense, and when that happens, it's never really about the numbers anymore. It's about power, control, and who actually holds leverage when the spotlight gets too bright to ignore. Because in a world where athletes are taught from the moment they turn pro to secure the bag as fast as possible, protect against injury, against decline, against being forgotten, one decision has completely flipped that logic on its head. A rookie. In a league that has historically struggled to pay its stars. Walking away from money that most professionals will never see in a lifetime. We're not talking about a few endorsement dollars or a short-term overseas stint. We're talking about reports of more than $20 million sitting on the table. Cash, equity, ownership opportunities, guaranteed security. And yet, Caitlin Clark reportedly said no. At first, the rumors sounded absurd. Internet noise. Agent-driven leverage plays. The kind of speculation that pops up every off-season and quietly disappears once reality sets in. After all, this is the WNBA. A league where even top draft picks are introduced to professional basketball with salaries that barely register compared to their cultural impact. The idea that a rookie could turn down 8 figures felt disconnected from everything we thought we understood about women's basketball economics. But then the smoke didn't fade. Instead, it thickened. And what emerged from it wasn't gossip. It was a warning sign. Because when a player doesn't chase the money, it usually means the money isn't the goal. It means something bigger is being negotiated behind the scenes. Something structural. Something that exposes how fragile the current system really is. This isn't a story about loyalty to a franchise. It's not a feel-good narrative about loving the game more than the paycheck. And it definitely isn't a simple case of a rookie being naive about her market value. This is a calculated power move that has sent front offices into panic mode, forced league executives into defensive postures, and quietly shifted the balance of leverage inside women's basketball faster than anyone was prepared for. Because when someone with all the leverage refuses to use it the way you expect, the entire system has to ask an uncomfortable question. What happens next, if she keeps saying no? And to understand why this decision matters as much as it does, you have to understand the financial reality she walked into the moment she entered the league. When Caitlin Clark was drafted number 1 overall, the celebration came with a quiet reality check that almost nobody wanted to talk about out loud. Her rookie contract, governed by the league's collective bargaining agreement, slotted her into a base salary hovering around $76,000. On paper, that's professional money. In context, it's almost surreal. Because this wasn't a normal rookie arrival. This was a player who had already been selling out arenas before she ever wore a WNBA jersey. A player whose college games were pulling television numbers that rivaled established professional sports. A player whose name alone could shift broadcast windows, ticket pricing, and sponsorship conversations. And yet, the system treated her like every other top pick before her, as if the scale of her impact didn't matter. At first, most people accepted it as just another example of how the league works. The rules are the rules. The salary structure is fixed. Everyone waits their turn. That logic has been repeated for decades, and it's usually where the conversation ends. But this time, the market didn't wait. Almost immediately, whispers started circulating that outside organizations were paying attention. Not casually. Aggressively. They saw a gap between value and compensation so wide it looked like an invitation. If the WNBA couldn't pay her what she was worth, someone else would at least try. Early on, those whispers were easy to dismiss. The numbers sounded inflated, unrealistic, almost irresponsible. A rookie, barely months into her professional career, allegedly being floated figures that dwarfed not only her WNBA salary but the lifetime earnings of many veterans. It felt like the kind of rumor designed to stir headlines, not something grounded in reality. Except the rumors didn't die. Instead, they became more specific, more consistent. Different sources, different corners of the basketball world, all pointing toward the same conclusion. There was real money being discussed. Not symbolic offers. Not exposure deals. Real financial packages that reflected what Clark meant to the sport, not what the rulebook said she was allowed to earn. That's when the tone shifted. Because once you accept that those numbers were real, the entire structure starts to look unstable. A league that pays its most marketable star less than a fraction of her actual economic impact suddenly finds itself exposed. Not morally. Economically. The contrast between what she generated and what she was allowed to receive became impossible to ignore. This wasn't just about one contract anymore. It was about whether the league's financial model could survive contact with a player who broke every assumption it was built on. Once the gap between value and salary became impossible to ignore, the offers didn't just appear, they escalated. Quietly at first, then with enough consistency that people inside the league stopped pretending it was speculation. Multiple outside organizations saw the same thing at the same time. A generational star trapped inside a pay structure that couldn't touch her market value. One of the most aggressive suitors was the Unrivaled League, a newly launched venture backed by current WNBA stars who understood the problem better than anyone. The pitch wasn't framed as a cash grab. It was framed as a revolution. A league built by players, for players, designed to keep elite talent from having to fly overseas just to make real money. And to land a centerpiece, they didn't offer a standard contract. They reportedly offered equity, actual ownership, a stake in the league itself, on top of a salary that would have dwarfed Clark's WNBA earnings by a factor that almost feels fictional. It was the kind of proposal usually reserved for retired legends or founding partners, not a rookie still learning defensive coverages at the professional level. Then there was the Big 3 league. That offer wasn't whispered, it was confirmed publicly. A reported $5 million to participate in a league that thrives on spectacle, star power, and viral moments. For most athletes, that number alone would end the conversation. It represented instant security, zero ambiguity, and freedom from the grind of a league that had historically struggled to compensate its stars. Add in overseas opportunities. Clubs in Turkey and other European markets that have long functioned as the financial safety net for elite women's players, and suddenly the total value of non-WNBA money hovering around Clark reached that $20 million mark that initially sounded so ridiculous. And then she didn't take it. That's the part that broke people's brains. Not because turning down money is unheard of, but because of what it signaled. She didn't hedge. She didn't split seasons. She didn't keep one foot in each world. She reportedly walked away from every alternative path that would have paid her immediately and handsomely. In doing so, she created a situation that nobody had prepared for. Because when a player refuses to monetize their leverage in the obvious ways, it forces every other stakeholder to confront why that leverage exists in the first place. And that realization landed hardest in one specific building. On the surface, you might think this was the dream scenario for the Indiana Fever. A generational star chooses commitment, turns down outside distractions, focuses entirely on the franchise that drafted her. In theory, that's exactly what every front office says it wants. In reality, it's terrifying. Because when a player turns down more than $20 million to stay inside your ecosystem, the relationship instantly changes. The power dynamic flips. This is no longer a team employing a player. It's an organization being trusted with an asset that could have walked away and chose not to. And that trust comes with a cost that can't be written into a contract. From the moment those offers were rejected, the Fever's margin for error evaporated. Every roster decision now carries weight. Every coaching choice is scrutinized differently. Every loss feels louder. Because Clark's loyalty, if you want to call it that, isn't unconditional. It's an evaluation period. A live audit of whether this franchise is capable of building something worthy of the sacrifice she just made. Inside the front office, this creates a pressure cooker. General managers are used to negotiating from positions of control. They set the terms. They manage the timeline. But this situation doesn't allow for patience. If the Fever fail to surround Clark with talent, if development stalls, if organizational missteps pile up, there is no excuse left to hide behind. They can't say the market wasn't there. They can't say she needed time. They can't say she didn't believe in the project. She already proved she did. That's what makes this so uncomfortable. Clark essentially fronted the league and the franchise her future value. She subsidized their growth with her own restraint. And now the bill is due in expectations. If Indiana succeeds, they look visionary. If they fail, the narrative shifts quickly. The rejected money becomes evidence, not trivia. It becomes the opening line of every future conversation about trades, free agency, and missed opportunities. And the Fever know it. They're not just managing a rookie anymore. They're managing the centerpiece of the league's financial momentum. A player whose presence lifts television numbers, sponsorship conversations, and league relevance in real time. Losing her focus, or worse, her faith, wouldn't just hurt Indiana. It would echo everywhere. But even with all that pressure in Indianapolis, the real shockwaves were being felt hundreds of miles away, inside the league office itself. While Indiana was dealing with pressure, the situation inside the league office was something else entirely. Because this wasn't just a franchise problem. This was an existential one. For Kathy Engelbert, the reported rejection of outside money triggered a scenario the league had never seriously planned for. The commissioner's role is built around balance. Competitive balance. Financial balance. Narrative balance. The league works when no single player becomes larger than the structure that governs them. But Clark's decision didn't just challenge that idea. It exposed how fragile it really was. On paper, everything looked perfect. The league had just announced a massive new media rights deal, valued at roughly $2.2 billion over 11 years. Executives framed it as proof that the long-term vision was finally paying off. Growth was real. Stability had arrived. The league was entering a new era. Behind closed doors, everyone understood the subtext. That deal doesn't happen without Caitlin Clark. Her rookie season didn't just boost ratings. It reshaped viewing habits. Networks adjusted scheduling around her games. Broadcasters promoted matchups differently. Ticket demand surged wherever she played. The league's most valuable asset wasn't a franchise or a market. It was one player. That's what made her rejection of outside money so unsettling. Traditionally, the WNBA's leverage has come from necessity. Players needed the league for visibility, for legitimacy, for access to sponsors. Clark broke that assumption before she ever played a professional minute. She arrived famous, profitable, self-sustaining. By refusing to chase the quick money elsewhere, she wasn't weakening her position. She was strengthening it. She was signaling that she didn't need to dilute her brand to get paid. That she could afford patience. And patience in this situation is power. For a commissioner trying to keep owners aligned and the system intact, that's a nightmare. Because once a player proves they can survive without the league's financial structure, the league loses its primary point of control. You can't pressure someone who isn't desperate. You can't outweight someone who has already secured their future. The fear inside the league office isn't that Clark might leave tomorrow. It's that she doesn't have to. And that reality forces every conversation, about salaries, travel, scheduling, and long-term planning, to happen on her timeline, not the league's. And just when it seemed like the outside leagues were the biggest threat, another uncomfortable truth surfaced. One that involved a league built by players themselves. On paper, the Unrivaled League was supposed to be the answer. A modern solution to an old problem. No more off-season flights to unfamiliar countries. No more risking your body overseas just to make a livable income. It was pitched as empowerment. Players taking control of their own economic future. That's exactly why their pursuit of Caitlin Clark mattered so much. By structuring an offer that included equity, Unrivaled wasn't just trying to sign a star. They were admitting something quietly but clearly. Their entire model needed her level of visibility to truly work. A league built to solve systemic underpayment still required a transcendent figure to legitimize it in the public eye. And when Clark hesitated, or outright declined, that plan fractured. Because her decision didn't just affect Unrivaled's launch strategy. It sent a ripple through the entire player ecosystem. If the most marketable athlete in women's basketball wasn't rushing to anchor a player-owned league, what did that say about the stability of that alternative? For veteran players, the reaction was complicated. Many of them had spent years grinding through seasons at home and abroad, stacking games in Europe, Turkey, or Russia just to build financial security. They took risks. They sacrificed bodies. They made choices out of necessity, not preference. Then a rookie comes in, and calmly walks away from 8 figures. Not out of protest. Not out of rebellion. Just disinterest. That's where resentment starts to creep in. Not always loudly. Sometimes it shows up as silence. Sometimes as tension. Sometimes as hard fouls, sharp words, or dismissive commentary. When one player has the luxury to say no, it exposes how few others ever had that option. Clark's refusal to be positioned as the savior of yet another league made one thing clear. She wasn't interested in carrying a system on her back. Not the WNBA's. Not Unrivaled's. She wasn't chasing revolution for its own sake. She was chasing dominance on the main stage. And that decision, intentional or not, deepened the divide. Because it reinforced the idea that her path operates on a different set of rules. Rules shaped by leverage, timing, and financial insulation that most players never experienced. That insulation didn't appear overnight. It came from somewhere. And once you trace it back, everything starts to make sense. You don't walk away from more than $20 million unless you already know where the floor is. And in Caitlin Clark's case, that floor isn't built on hope or future promises. It's built on one of the most powerful brands in sports. Her signature agreement with Nike, rumored to be worth around $28 million over 8 years, changes the math in ways the WNBA has never had to confront before. This wasn't a post-breakout endorsement scramble. Nike committed before she ever logged a professional minute. They weren't betting on production. They were betting on inevitability. That matters because it quietly redefines who her primary employer really is. On paper, she plays for the Indiana Fever. In reality, the largest financial stake in her career belongs to Nike. When a shoe deal pays hundreds of times more than a team's salary, influence shifts. Control shifts. Priorities shift. If a team wants her to push through minor wear and tear, but a global brand wants to protect a long-term investment, there's no real debate about whose voice carries more weight. That imbalance is what unsettles league executives. It exposes how little authority the traditional structures have over a player whose value exists far beyond the court. This is why the rejection of outside leagues matters so much. Clark isn't chasing every available check. She's consolidating, streamlining, choosing partnerships that align with longevity rather than short-term spikes. She's not spreading risk, she's concentrating power. And that's what turns her from a star into a system-level problem. Because when your biggest draw doesn't financially rely on you, your ability to dictate terms collapses. You can't pressure. You can't threaten. You can't delay. The usual tools don't work. The only option left is adaptation. Her decision also reframes the narrative around ambition. This isn't someone trying to escape the WNBA. It's someone trying to redefine it from the inside. By refusing to cash out elsewhere, she forces the league to confront the mismatch between its public success and its internal economics. The message is subtle but unmistakable. Fix it here, or watch the cracks spread. And once that message landed, it forced people to revisit an uncomfortable question. Was the money ever really the problem in the first place? Once you strip away the headlines and the shock value, what Caitlin Clark did starts to look less like a rejection and more like a quiet confrontation. Not a press conference. Not a statement. Just a decision that exposed everything the league has avoided addressing for years. For a long time, the prevailing explanation for low salaries in women's basketball was simple. The money wasn't there. Fans were told to be patient. Players were told to sacrifice. Executives repeated the same line season after season. That sustainability had to come before compensation. That growth took time. Then Clark arrived, and suddenly tens of millions of dollars appeared out of nowhere. Private investors, rival leagues, media partners, brands willing to commit long-term capital without hesitation. All of it surfaced the moment someone proved the demand was real. That's why her decision hit so hard. By refusing to take the outside money, she effectively removed the league's favorite excuse. The money exists. What didn't exist, until now, was leverage strong enough to force it into the open. Her presence alone has already changed operational behavior. The league's long-standing resistance to charter flights evaporated almost overnight. For years, players were told private travel was impossible. Too expensive. Too unrealistic. Then suddenly, tens of millions were allocated to fix the issue. Not because the math changed but because the risk did. No one wanted to explain why the league's most valuable asset was standing in TSA lines after turning down generational wealth elsewhere. Clark didn't demand better travel. She didn't negotiate publicly. She didn't threaten to leave. She simply made herself impossible to undervalue without consequence. And that is far more effective than any public protest. The league office understood the message immediately. If they didn't raise standards internally, the argument for her leaving became bulletproof. Every inconvenience, every corner cut, every outdated policy would point back to the same question. Why stay? That's why this moment matters beyond one contract. It exposes how reactive the system has been. Progress didn't arrive because the league planned for it. It arrived because a player forced the issue by existing at a level the structure wasn't built to support. And now that the curtain has been pulled back, there's no putting it back in place. Because the next phase of this story isn't about what she turned down. It's about what she's waiting for. For all the noise surrounding the money she turned down, the most important detail is the one people barely mention. Time. Because Caitlin Clark isn't operating in a vacuum. She's operating with a deadline that everyone inside the league is painfully aware of. The WNBA's current collective bargaining agreement includes an opt-out window that's approaching faster than it looks. When that moment arrives, the entire financial structure of the league is back on the table. Salary caps. Revenue sharing. Player compensation. Everything that has been treated as immovable suddenly becomes negotiable. Clark knows this. Her representatives know this. And the league definitely knows this. Turning down outside money right now isn't hesitation. It's positioning. She isn't sacrificing leverage. She's preserving it. By staying inside the system while its value explodes, she becomes the central data point in every negotiation. The proof. The example. The reason numbers can't stay where they are. For the Indiana Fever, that creates a narrow window. Roughly 2 seasons to prove they are more than lucky. 2 seasons to show they can build intelligently, attract talent, and operate like a franchise worthy of a player who could have left and chose not to. Every slow start, every questionable decision, every missed opportunity now lives under a microscope. And Indiana isn't the only one watching the clock. New ownership groups in expansion markets are watching closely. Wealthy investors entering the league aren't thinking in terms of tradition or patience. They're thinking in terms of assets. If the Fever fail to maximize this moment, those owners already know what pitch they'll make when the time comes. Bigger markets. Better infrastructure. A cleaner slate. That's why Clark's decision has reshaped behavior across the league. It has turned future conversations into present pressure. It has transformed her rookie contract into a temporary truce rather than a long-term solution. She didn't take the money because she believes the real payday hasn't been unlocked yet. And by waiting, she's forcing everyone else to prove they deserve to be part of it. When people look back on this moment, they'll probably reduce it to a headline. A rookie turned down $20 million. A shocking decision. A bold gamble. But that framing misses the point entirely. Because this was never about refusing money. It was about refusing timing. Caitlin Clark didn't walk away from outside offers because she didn't want to get paid. She walked away because she understood something most systems hope their stars never realize. Leverage is most powerful when you don't spend it right away. By staying inside the WNBA while its value explodes, she forces the league to rise to her level instead of escaping to a place that already recognizes it. That's why this decision rattled executives. It exposed how much of the league's recent momentum rests on one player choosing restraint over comfort. It revealed how quickly standards can change when the risk of losing that player becomes real. And it made one thing painfully clear. Control no longer flows in just one direction. The league is no longer setting the terms and waiting for players to accept them. It's reacting, adjusting, upgrading. Because the alternative is unthinkable. This isn't the end of the story. It's the opening chapter of a negotiation that will define the next era of women's basketball. Salaries, travel, power, ownership. All of it is now up for discussion, whether the league is ready or not. And the most unsettling part for the establishment is this. She didn't have to say a word to make it happen. If you want to stay ahead of stories like this, where power shifts quietly before it explodes publicly, make sure you subscribe to the channel. These conversations evolve fast, and the details matter. Like the video if this breakdown helped you see the bigger picture, and drop a comment with your take on what this decision really means for the league's future. Every interaction helps the channel grow, and it lets us keep breaking down the stories everyone else reacts to too late.